Hi, thank you for attending the Hot Topics briefing for our Advocacy Day in Springfield on Wednesday, February 26, 2019. I'm Lisa Garbati, the Legislative Advocacy Director for the Illinois PTA. I'd like to start off by briefly talking about the PTA's mission. Above all else, we are an advocacy organization for the children of Illinois. As you may know, our mission is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. This mission guides us in everything we do in PTA. It is the reason for our founding and the basis for everything we do. Our founders, Alice McLellan Burney and Phoebe Apperson-Hurst, founded the PTA in 1897 because of their concern over child education and welfare issues at the time. Children were entering school as early as the 5th grade. They were working in factories and put in adult prisons for misbehaviors. These two women believed that someone needed to speak up for all children. Many things that we take for granted in our education system now and our society are the result of efforts by PTA advocates like yourself, including things like child labor laws, the juvenile justice system, the public health system, kindergarten, childhood immunizations, and the school lunch program. Even something as simple as the swing arms on the front of a school bus is the result of PTA advocacy. That started with a resolution by one PTA in Illinois. Our focus on Advocacy Day will be primarily the funding of the formula for the Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success Act, Public Act 10467, environmental issues in connection with our existing resolutions on climate change and fracking, and our 2016 resolution and related position statements on justice-involved youth. I'll be going over what we will ask our legislators to do and then cover each of the talking points. We're going to start with education funding. When the Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success Act was signed into law in August of 2017, part of the advancement of it was the creation of a long-awaited and much-needed funding formula, one that is more equitable than what Illinois has had in the past, and we have supported this change. However, the Illinois legislature has not yet addressed the necessary funding of this formula. Without appropriate funding, this is just yet another empty promise to the children of Illinois. We are asking the legislature to meet the funding targets for fiscal year 2020 by providing the $11.765 billion to close the state funding gap and fund this new formula by implementing a graduated rate income tax that would increase the tax rate for those who are able to pay more instead of the current flat tax that we have in place, adding new sources of state revenue, including a state tax on certain services, and a repeal of the Tuition Scholarship Fund program, which could drain up to $75 million a year from the already underfunded public schools. Let's discuss the basis for these asks to our legislators and review the talking points that we want you to share with them. Let's start with this current statute. Public Act 100-0465, the Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success Act, which includes the new evidence-based funding model. The funding model is based on appropriation of funds for education that grows each year based on needs within the public school population. In connection with this, we point out the most recent recommendation for the 2020 fiscal year was that $11.765 billion was needed to close this funding gap. In light of the fact that the most recent fiscal year funding provided only $350 million, approximately 2% of what was actually needed, the Illinois PTA is concerned that the benefits of this act will not impact our children because the tenets of the act will remain unfunded. The state of Illinois now needs to address the financial requirements of this public act. Let's talk about the means to increase revenue for public education. The Illinois PTA as an organization has long supported a combination of state and local property taxes to support education to create a stable source of income for that public education. However, the current dependence on local property taxes to fund education contributes to inequitable funding of schools from district to district because primarily of the differences in property values. The Illinois PTA legislative platform supports a graduated rate income tax. The creation of adequate, equitable, and sustainable sources of revenue for schools, and the creation of new sources of state revenue, including tax on services. In terms of our platform, item 2A supports a revision of the revenue article of the state constitution, allowing for the enactment of a graduated rate income tax. That is a tax policy that would be based on the ability to pay. Item 2B supports adequate, equitable, and sustainable sources of revenue for schools. And item 2D supports new sources of state revenue, including consideration of a state tax on services. Currently, the Illinois state income tax is a flat rate of 4.95%. One way to increase revenue would be to move from this flat tax rate to a graduated rate income tax where those who are able to pay more actually do pay more. Since the Illinois Constitution prohibits a graduated rate income tax, a constitutional amendment would be required to make this change. We could also increase the income tax rate. Another means of increasing revenue would be to tax services that are not currently subject to one. One of the common criticisms of taxing services is that people who live near the state border will cross the state lines in order to avoid the tax. However, according to the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, a bipartisan advocacy group, they've determined that there are a number of services in Illinois that could be taxed before a tax on those services is even comparable to that in neighboring states. As such, the threat of people crossing the state line to, let's say, get their hair cut is pretty limited. Increasing the number of services taxed by the state is an important approach to generating revenue for us, particularly given that our economy has become increasingly service-oriented. The addition of a tax on certain services would adapt our tax structure to better reflect this current economy. Certainly, the repeal of the tuition fund scholarship program embedded within this statute will add as much as $75 million per year to benefit public education. We're now going to discuss our ask. So just so you know what our ask is, it's what we want our elected officials to do. So in the case of education funding, our ask to legislators and the governor is to ensure a sustainable revenue stream that would finance the evidence-based funding model and provide $11.765 billion to close the fiscal year 2020 state funding gap. And we can do this through a revision to the revenue article of the state constitution to allow the enactment of a graduated rate income tax, and or an increase in the current rate, and or the addition of a sales tax on certain services. We also want the repeal of the tuition scholarship fund program, which could drain up to $75 million annually from already underfunded public schools. Here are a few talking points that we can go through with our legislators. We need to emphasize to legislators that our education, the education of our children, that is an investment. Walter McMahon, an emeritus professor of economics and of education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, had calculated the return on investment of education spending in Illinois. He determined that kindergarten through grade 12 education has a return on investment of 9.5%, and that in community colleges and four-year colleges, this was even higher. As one comparison, the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index had a return on investment of 7.2% over the same period. Basically, spending money on education is a better investment for the state than investing in the stock market during an historically high period of market growth. The result of this high rate of return on state spending on education is that every dollar Illinois spends on education is paid back to the state in 2.3 years. Ultimately, education is one of the best investments the state can make. We also want to point out that the funding model includes important supports for on-site health personnel, including mental health personnel such as school psychologists. The failure to adequately fund this formula could lead to children in need of medical or mental health supports not receiving necessary attention from appropriate health professionals in the school system, or the failure to receive prompt referrals for appropriate off-site treatment. Potentially, this would have a detrimental impact on a child's ability to participate in school and benefit from classroom experiences. Here, I want to point out that the percentage of children impacted could be substantial. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, also known as the AAP, approximately 1 in 5 children in the United States has an identifiable mental disorder. The AAP also warns that the failure to properly identify and treat mental health disorders can lead to isolation, depression, violence, drug use, and/or suicide. Additionally, as to what's known as adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, in one survey taken in 2011 to 2012, the National Survey of Children's Health found that 47.9% of children in the United States aged 17 and under have had at least one of 9 key ACEs, and 22.6% have had 2 or more ACEs. A child's ACEs experience can have an adverse impact on health and mental health, increasing the likelihood of issues as varied as anxiety, asthma, depression, and diabetes. Any one of these issues can impact a child's ability to participate and benefit from the classroom experience. And with respect to the ability to respond to a health emergency, such as an allergic or anaphylactic reaction, trained personnel available to respond can mean the difference between life and death. Statistically, here's one example. 25% of first-time allergic reactions occur in the school setting. So certainly these provisions should be funded. Next slide, please. The next issue we're going to brief you on is climate change. If you recall, the delegates to the 2017 Illinois PTA Convention passed the resolution on climate change. The Illinois PTA believes that a safe and healthy environment includes one that is free from the impact of human activities leading to climate change. Children represent a particularly vulnerable group in this regard. We applaud the executive order signed by Governor Pritzker, confirming that Illinois will abide by the Paris Accord on climate change. We now need to ensure that related legislation is passed in order to meet that goal. So what is our ask here? As I mentioned earlier, an ask is what we want our elected officials to do. And we again applaud the executive order signed by Governor Pritzker. We now need to ensure that the related legislation is passed. The Illinois PTA's ask here is for its legislators to propose and support legislation that will ensure that the goals of mitigating the negative effects of climate change are met, industry activities that contribute to adverse climate change continue to be regulated, that we continue to support the use of renewable resources, and to continue opposition to the easing of existing regulations of industries whose activities have adversely impacted climate change. According to 2 separate joint U.S. agency reports, the 2010 report, A Human Health Perspective on Climate Change, and the 2016 report, The Impacts of Climate Change on Human Health in the United States, a Scientific Assessment, Climate change is likely to adversely impact human health and the environment, including an increase in human developmental issues due to prenatal and early childhood malnutrition caused by decreased food supplies and exposure to toxic substances, respiratory health issues, including asthma, as a result of increased exposure to pollen, mold, and pollution, foodborne diseases and nutritional deficiencies as a result of food contamination, staple food shortages, and a reduction in the nutritional value of food due to the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and an increase in certain cancers due to the increased duration and intensity of ultraviolet radiation. Additionally, the U.S. agencies involved in these reports anticipate that there will be an increase in extreme weather events. These include winter storms, intense cold waves, heat waves, tornadoes, hurricanes, and floods. Each of these extreme weather events can in turn lead to an increase in potential for injury, disease, and death. Another health concern related to climate change is an increase in infection and disease due to pathogens in water, food, and those carried by vectors such as insects like mosquitoes as a result of rising sea levels, changes in temperature extremes, changes in seasonal weather patterns, and an increase in extreme precipitation and storms. Next, we are going to discuss the issues addressed in one of our 2017 resolutions, the resolution on hydraulic fracturing and oil drilling standards that was passed by our membership at convention. As some background, hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, is a process that breaks up rocks below the Earth's surface by injecting chemicals and liquids at high pressure in order to extract natural gas or oil. Our resolution was based on the research we reviewed showing that there are substantial health and safety concerns related to these processes. Our ask here is that legislators propose and support legislation to regulate hydraulic fracturing and other oil and gas extraction methods in order to prevent the likely adverse impact on the environment, our children, and our communities, and to support the additional evaluations of current methods as well as new methods of gas and oil extraction and their potential impact on the environment by independent agencies not affiliated with the energy industry. Now, let's review some issues and talking points in this regard. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, the process of fracking could impact drinking water resources in certain circumstances in adverse ways, including potential spills of the related fluid and additives used in the fracking process, the injection of fracking fluids directly into or nearby groundwater resources, the discharge of inadequately treated wastewater to surface resources, and potentially the improper disposal or storage of the wastewater from this process into unlined pits, resulting in contamination of groundwater resources. So how many children and families could this impact in Illinois? Actually, a substantial number. With respect to drinking water concerns, an estimated 35% of Illinois residents, including 90% of all rural Illinois residents, obtain their drinking water from groundwater and aquifers. All of these could face detrimental impact to their health in the event of an inadequately regulated hydraulic fracturing system. Another concern relates to the chemicals used in fracking. According to the EPA, some of the chemicals in this process are known to be hazardous to human health and may include known carcinogens such as benzene, as well as radioactive materials, including radium. Air pollution is yet another concern. According to a study by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, Air contaminants released in the fracking process include known carcinogens as well as ground-level ozone. Finally, fracking has been shown to have led to a substantial increase in induced earthquakes. Those are man-made earthquakes in the Midwest. According to the 2014 United States Geological Survey, Illinois is one of the states at the highest risk of having an earthquake. The process of hydraulic fracturing has led to a substantial increase in induced earthquakes. And by this I mean earthquakes triggered by, as I said, human activities. In other areas of the Midwest, fracking has caused an increase, or we believe has caused an increase of an average of 24 earthquakes per year during the period of 1978 to 2008, up to until 2015, when there were 1,010 such earthquakes recorded. In one case, the state of Oklahoma, which was geographically stable prior to fracking in that state, now has more earthquakes per year than California. One concern in this regard for people of Illinois is that the state of Illinois rests on a portion of the New Madrid seismic zone. Now, our next issue will relate to our continuing positions regarding justice-involved youth, the 2016 resolution on justice-involved youth, and our 2017 report to convention on these matters, as well as related changes that were made to our legislation platform at the 2017 convention. At issue here is the fact that research indicates that the human brain is not fully developed until age 25. However, Illinois statutes governing youth and young adults in the justice system fail to reflect this current research. So what will be our ask to legislators? Our primary ask is that Illinois legislators propose and pass legislation that gradually increases the age that young offenders, that is, offenders aged 18 through 21, charged with misdemeanors are handled ensure that they are handled in the juvenile court. We also want to ensure that legislation is passed that fairly addresses the differentiated development of youths and young adults in that age group of 18 to 24 in the justice system. We want legislators to propose and pass legislation that ensures attorney representation for alleged juvenile offenders at all stages of their contact in the justice system. Currently, many of you may not realize this, children are not required to have an attorney present during an interrogation in the juvenile justice system. And finally, we ask that legislators propose and pass legislation that includes provisions that reduce the disproportionately high representation of minorities in the justice system, in the juvenile justice system, and ensure that the jurisdiction of the juvenile court is based on age, not the crime or alleged crime, and that any determination to transfer a minor to a criminal court is made by the juvenile court. Next slide. A number of studies have shown that while the areas of the brain that relate to emotions appear to be developed by age 17, the areas that control decision-making really aren't fully developed until age 25. This brain's uneven development, known as the maturity gap, leads to an increased likelihood of risk-taking behavior and difficulty in controlling responses to emotional situations. This, in turn, increases the likelihood that they will become involved with the justice system. Research suggests that the group from 18 to 25 would benefit the most from different treatment that would take this into consideration. In relation to the research in our report, the Illinois PTA legislative platform was amended to provide that we will promote and support laws in our justice system that address the differing needs of youth as they continue to mature from 18 through and including age 24. Several other U.S. states, including California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont, as well as in countries outside of the United States, have recognized this. There is, in fact, a movement to have young adults in these areas in the age group of 18 to 24 be adjudicated separately from adults over 25 when they come in contact to the justice system. Another issue that you can mention to your legislator is that the research regarding human brain development supports continued reform in the juvenile justice system. This includes the need to provide adequate counsel to the alleged juvenile offenders at all stages of contact with the justice system, and that the jurisdiction of the juvenile court be based on age, not the alleged crime. Finally, and certainly not least, there is a disproportionate percentage of minorities in the juvenile justice system compared to the percentage in the overall population. This is reflective of an inequity in handling. Thank you for watching this webinar. We have been advocating for Illinois children for over 100 years, and we couldn't succeed without members like you. We hope that we will see you on Illinois PTA Advocacy Day on Wednesday, February 6th in Springfield. Meet us at the Illinois State Capitol Building, 401 South 2nd Street in Springfield, Illinois, at the Illinois PTA booth in the Rotunda. We will be there from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. this Wednesday. Parking is located conveniently nearby. Let us know you're coming by registering at the address indicated on the screen. If you have any questions, just send me a quick email. Lisa Garbati, lgarbati@illinoispta.org. Thank you.